Hi, good evening. It's like the movies, once the lights go down, it's like, welcome to this kind of, it's odd being in front, I'm just going to sort of say it now, it's odd being in front of this many people, and it's kind of being in an auditorium seating is probably quite unique for a lot of us. It's unique for us being here, as it probably is for you in the crowd as well. So thank you for coming. My name's Gavin Bannerman. I'm the Director of Queensland Memory here at State Library of Queensland. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners. The place that we gathered on here at South Bank is a traditional meeting, gathering and sharing place for Aboriginal people. We gladly continue that tradition today. I think acknowledgement and reflection upon that ongoing connection to place is a really important aspect of what we do here at State Library of Queensland, and we try and carry that out every day. It's hopefully maybe something that you might do as a fellow as well. This event is being photographed and recorded, so thank you for Jana up top who's recording this event so that anybody unable to make today's session will be able to go back and look at it. It should be about a week. In a week's time it will be available through the State Library website for people to view. And if you've attended and you want to go back and like, what was that question I asked? What was that thing that person said? There will be a record of what we've said. Just obviously we live in a COVID environment at the moment, so things are a little bit different. Thank you for complying with all the kind of things we need to do to keep everyone safe, and that's our number one priority here at the moment. So thank you for, we've registered via Eventbrite, we've scanned with the QR code, we're seating in our allocated seat. One little twist on tonight as well is we would normally have a roving microphone, but obviously you probably couldn't engineer a device to transmit disease more effectively. So what we'll do is, for the question component of the night, I'll get you to just ask a question. So you don't have that, oh, please wait for the microphone, just shout it out. And then I'll just quickly restate it so that it is recorded through the audio and then recorded on the film recording. So I'm not trying to mansplain what you've said. I'm literally just restating that for the record, which is probably mansplaining now that I think about it. Today, and I think it's really great to see so many people and so many new faces as well come along tonight. It's a really exciting time. And it's one of the rare opportunities that we get to talk about research that may be, and it's like it's the potential, it's that excitement of projects not yet started, which is probably there's still some optimism and there's still that sort of direction in which research may take is still being formed. So it's very exciting. So this night is part of the Queensland Memory Awards program that we run at State Library of Queensland annually, and it really is to lead that research and inquiry into Queensland history. It wouldn't be possible to do tonight or the awards program more fully without the support of the Queensland Library Foundation. I'd like to particularly thank those donors and supporters who make the Queensland Memory Awards possible. And in particular, individuals such as Dr. Catherine Middlehauser, whose generous donation enables us to offer the Middlehauser Scholar in Residence. I'd also like to thank the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame, who sponsor the Queensland Business Hall of Fame Fellowship and the Queensland Business History Award. So it's behind me on the screen, but just key dates, kind of pencil in the calendar. 25th of March is the due date for all applications, and that's close of business. The website has the latest information, if there's, in terms of guidelines and the forms that you need to complete in order to submit your application. They're online there through the Queensland Memory website. You can also see, just to give you kind of a bit of a gauge of some of the work that's been done by previous fellows, you can see the profiles on all of our previous fellows from 2020 going backwards, and that includes video content where sometimes they profile and talk about their historical inquiry, and also some of the details and nature of their project. There's also blogs, which those fellows, as part of the commitment as being a fellow, we ask for a pound of flesh, and that pound of flesh is blog posts through the John Oxley Library blog, which are illuminating, fascinating, and really do, in a conversational tone, bring new knowledge to a public audience. We've just completed the research reveal sessions for a previous round of fellows. So fellows actually give public talks and presentations on the outcomes of their research. And we finished the 2019 fellows in just last week. We did Dr. Tricia King finished her presentation on the Peters Ice Cream Factory. So we'll be going into that 2020 round. So look out for, some of our 2020 fellows research reveals sessions. So I'll just quickly do some introductions and just talk a little bit about the format of tonight. So this is basically kind of panel discussion sort of format. So I'll seed the conversation with some of our guests tonight, and we'll talk a little bit about what it is to be a fellow, what we look for when we're assessing fellowship applications, and also those kind of things which we've noticed in people who are undertaking their fellowship journey. So I just want to really, and it's like, thank you for coming. We're so amazingly appreciative of people who have an interest in doing research using the collections of State Library. There is a finite amount of resources and fellowships to go around, but if you are unsuccessful in getting the fellowship, I think everybody is encouraged to apply again, but also we're very keen to work with people to get some outcome of your research. It's like, how can we support you to do your research? Might not be with a fellowship hat on, but other ways that we can see those outcomes reach the light of day. So I'm just going to introduce our esteemed guests today, who represent a diversity of perspectives and viewpoints on the fellowship process. I'm going to, because we didn't have a seating plan, unlike you, we don't have a seating plan. We've socially distanced, so we're not seating according to my notes, and it's just the OCD in me needs to announce the people in the from your left to right, my right to left. So I'd just like to introduce Robyn Hamilton, who is our lead of collection building at State Library of Queensland. I just realised that that Robyn's been stitched up and doesn't have a bio, so this is gonna test me as a manager of how well I know Robyn. So Robyn's performed a range of roles. I think you've been at State Library for a few decades is probably one way to describe it, but through that time with our collections has accrued a vast knowledge of the material in our collection, and with a particular background and emphasis on the music collections here at State Library, being a long-term music librarian, as well as Robyn curated our QAnzac 100 project and initiative, series of initiatives. So there's exhibitions, talks, as well as acquisition of a lot of key content which marked the centenary of the First World War. And you could see the outcome of a lot of that at the Anzac Square galleries over in the city. So Robyn's amazing. She has also been the chair of our copyright group. So copyright questions will be funnels to Robyn, but a very valuable member of the staff here at State Library of Queensland. And just so you know, we often we'll give this session in the John Oxley Library Reading Room. We can't do that because we can't give allocated seating there, but Robyn and I sit on level 4, so it's like when we talk about coming to the John Oxley Library or where we sit, we're kind of what you call level 4 people, which is also where the fellows undertake their research. Our next guest is Louise Martin-Chew. So since 1992, Louise has worked as a freelance art writer and has also been involved in publishing, public art and research. She's a PhD from University of Queensland in 2019. Louise's commitment to the creative industries, art and writing in Australia defines her working life. Louise's current projects include assisting Judy Watson with a book titled Women of Brisbane, Judy Watson, which includes biographical information of about 180 women who contributed to Brisbane and its history, published by the Museum of Brisbane. And that's going to be launched on International Women's Day this year, 8th of March. Look forward to that. In July 2021, Louise's biography of Fiona Foley will be published with a survey exhibition of her work by QUT Art Museum. Additionally, Louise is editing a book of essays with historian Ray Kirkove to be published by Boolarong Press in 2022, called Inventing Australiana, Aboriginal Contributions to Early Tourist Art of Queensland. So, a bit on the plate. But Louise was our 2019 John Oxley Library Fellow. I'm going to counter what I said, and actually it feels weird to not introduce you as a joint pair, so I'm going to skip you, sorry Helen, and I'm going to go to Matthew, who was Louise's partner in crime in doing their research project on the Queensland Government printing press, using the collections at State Library. So Matthew, at the furthest end of the panel, Wengert. I always do the Germanic V, but it's not with the Germanic V, is it? It's a W. After graduating from Griffith University, Matthew worked at the Australian War Memorial for a couple of years before returning to Brisbane, and more than a decade at Griffith as a research assistant and tutor. During that time, Matthew did research for several ABC and SBS documentaries. His work has always involved history, and mostly Queensland history, although he never actually studied history since high school. I would say right now that's not an impediment in any way. You don't need to have a PhD in history to do this. I myself, ashamed to say, didn't do history at high school. Matthew worked for and with the Cherbourg's Ration Shed Museum, off and on since it was founded, and is currently writing a book about the disastrous Spanish flu epidemic at Baramba, now Cherbourg, in 1919, on behalf of the Ration Shed Museum. In 2018, he received Brisbane City Council's Helen Taylor Award for Local History Research and published City in Masks, How Brisbane Fought the Spanish Flu. In 2020, his small publishing business and also books published Our Inside Voices, Reflections on COVID-19, containing creative writing by more than 50 Queensland authors and poets, with Louise being one of the editors. Matthew is currently gathering information and images for more books about Brisbane history, including a book about Brisbane bookshops, sorry, very different topic, and a book about King George Square. So, again, also a very prolific contributor to Brisbane and Queensland's cultural life. Now, sorry, Helen, I've left the best to last.
Oh, God.
So, Helen Gregory is a professional historian and consultant in Queensland history and cultural heritage conservation, not conversation, although there are plenty of those. She's written many commissioned histories, including Expressions of Mercy, Brisbane's Martyr Hospitals, 1906 to 2006, Playing for Keeps, C&K's First Century, 1907 to 2007. She's also the former chairman of the Queensland Heritage Council and was an adjunct professor in the Department of History at University of Queensland. Dr. Helen has a long association with Queensland Memory and State Library Queensland. She has an excellent understanding and knowledge of Queensland history. Helen has been a selection panellist for the Queensland Memory Awards since 2016. So, if this was a reality TV show, Helen would be that kind of judge who you've got to impress. So, welcome, Helen.
Thank you.
All right, I think I've read enough from the pages. So, this is an opportunity to ask questions and to delve a little bit deeper into the information which would make your research project potentially successful. I would say as well that there are no dumb questions, that the concept of doing a fellowship, if I didn't work at State Library Queensland, I wouldn't know what a fellowship was or is, or how do you do one of these, what is that, what's the outcome. So hopefully we give you a little bit more of a picture of how a fellowship occurs, what takes place, and how you might put yourself in a position to be able to do one. So I'll start off. Helen, did you want to just talk a little bit, because you have been on selection panels for a while, did you just want to tell a little bit about your experience of sitting on a panel? And it's always exciting, I think, when you're either sitting in the, it's digital now, so it's probably doesn't have that tangible sort of, you don't get the envelope with like all of the applications, although I think a lot of people print them out still. But there's that excitement of when you're about to open those applications and you think, what's in store? What is it that these people might be wanting to try and find and uncover in our collections? You want to talk about that?
Yes, and it really is a thrill, because no matter how much you work in Queensland history, and I'm sure Matthew and Louise would agree, you realise how much more there is to be done. So there really is that excitement to think, well, what do these people propose to do? And that's one of the reasons that even though it's boring paperwork, and I hate paperwork as much as the next person, the application is actually important, that you capture what you want to do in a way that attracts our attention. You think, wow, that's interesting. And that you have thought out how you're going to do it. And the other thing that's very important, we're talking about a 12-month fellowship. So it's important to make sure that your project is achievable in 12 months and that you can do the blog posts and perhaps do the public address or whatever in that 12-month period. Now, you might think, oh, I can't apply, my project's huge. Well, if that's the case, there's nothing to stop you thinking, but this aspect at the beginning of what I'm proposing to do as a very big project, that could be done in 12 months and it'll be a real contribution to what I want to do in the future. So there is a way of doing that. The other thing, just to be a little bit wary of, is being afraid to talk about something where a lot has been written, like the pastoral industry or the mining industry. There are always other aspects that no one's thought to look at. For instance, in the pastoral industry, what about the governesses who worked on stations? Are there records of how the children felt growing up in one of the awful droughts that we've had in various times? So even in those huge topics, there are always aspects that haven't really been examined. So that bit of creativity and imagination is really important. And I know the application doesn't let you write vast swathes of what you want to do. So I recommend actually practicing how you're going to get across the excitement of your idea, how you propose to achieve it, and why it's achievable, and what sort of outcome you see coming at the end of it. Those sorts of things are the sorts of things that you think, this person's really thought this out. They've realised that it is only 12 months, it is only a stipend, so maybe it is possible for me to work 3 days a week at my normal job and research at the rest, or if you're a real devil for punishment, work 5 days a week and research all the weekend. I know people who have done that, probably not recommended, but it has been done. So it's a matter of finding a project that excites you. It's very important that your enthusiasm somehow or other comes across in those limited amount of words, because you've really got to want to do these things, don't you? You've really got to have a niggle, an itch that needs scratching. So those are the sorts of things we look at. And one few years ago, we did have 2 applications, and we thought, these 2 people, very hard to separate them. And we try to be good examiners. We're not at all interested in what you can't do and don't know. We're interested in what you do know and can do. And these 2 people were very hard to separate. And we thought, well, we'll interview them and have a chat about this. One of the people had made a mistake in writing down their phone number, as simple as that. And I know it caused a couple of people a few headaches trying actually to track them down so they could be invited to an interview. So, and the other thing, even though no one likes the paperwork side of any of this, don't wait until 5 to 4 on the 25th of March to start your application, because it will take longer than that. So that's probably the summary of what I think is important.
Thanks, Helen. What about that? Do you want to talk, Helen and Matthew, a little bit about that process of applying and getting together, that application? Do you want to talk about how that was for you?
Louise and I had met at UQ, and I knew that she knew how to do applications, and I knew how to do applications. We spent weeks refining, tossing ideas back and forth. And if you've got a 300-word limit or a 500-word limit on a section, don't leave it at 200 words or 400 words or whatever. Don't overdo it, but don't underdo it. Make every word count. We were doing sections of If it was 200 words, we were doing 197 words or something. Just checking each sentence multiple times to refine it, to make sure it had some bite, and that we weren't leaving questions unanswered. You know.
And I think Helen's right, because our project was the Queensland Government Printing Office, and because the printing office printed everything from the beginning of the colony in about 1860 till 2013, there was a vast range of material, so we knew that in a year we wouldn't be able to look at all of it. So we really just took we knew exactly what we wanted to do, which was to look at the arty things, the very fine design and the things that really expressed how the colony saw itself all the way through Queensland's history. But the other thing that we did that we didn't know if anyone had actually done before is we wanted to work together, because Matthew had looked at the archive and knew what was there much more than I had, and I have done more kind of art writing than Matthew has. So we kind of had to write about how we'd actually do it together, and we had to, before we wrote it, we had to work out how that might go too.
Yeah. So we ended up applying to do a visual history rather than a history of this vast organisation that did work for every part of the government. But a visual history was something that we could achieve, 2 of us, in a year. We could have a good crack at that. If we had have applied to do a history of the printing office, it would have taken 10 people 10 years.
It's a question that sometimes people aren't aware that you can apply as a duo, you know, so those joint applications are encouraged as possible. Did you want to talk a little bit about, you know, how you operated in that way? Was it sort of, you know, like some particular, you know, somebody put out the garbage and the other person did the cooking, or did you split along lines, or how did you negotiate that?
We did a bit of talking and negotiating at the outset, but we really just said, I want to do this, I want to look at these things. And there was such an abundance of material. Because it was a government printer, everything was there, it wasn't hidden, it was all lying in plain sight and within reach. So we just chose what we wanted to look at and what we could get meaning out of, I think.
It did allow us to follow our interests, and we also tried to bring some new material in by doing interviews with people that came to us really through some of the media, about people who'd worked at the government printing office, and so many of them were over 85 and some of them are now 92. So obviously there was something in the water at the printing office that promoted good health. Anyway, so we split up those interviews too, and sometimes we both went, but basically by interviewing those people and getting their stories, we were bringing more things in, and often they had material they wanted to donate, so a little bit of that followed us as well, and we hope that will continue.
That's a beautiful segue to Robyn. So you know, if anybody wants to give anything to State Library, it's like, talk to Robyn. You know, so, did you want to talk a little bit about what things you look for if somebody's saying, I want to do a research project and it will generate all of these fabulous things which will be of great benefit to the organisation? Do you want to talk a little bit about what really are good things and what you're looking for?
Sure. It's true, yes. Often as you go along the road of a research project, you might encounter people who have other material which supports what you're doing, and it might be material which fits within our collecting guidelines here at State Library. So essentially we're looking to collect the documentary record of Queensland, and that comes in many shapes and forms. So we're not out to collect the world, we're out to collect I guess representatively rather than comprehensively, but we're looking for things which reveal something new or which enrich what we already have. So, for instance, we might have a collection of material from a particular station, and that might include ledgers and old cash books or old documents which denote the working life of the station. But there might be something sort of extra which is revealed as part of someone's research, which might be, as Helen said, something about children or the Indigenous inhabitants in and around the station, or just other sorts of documentary evidence which enrich the story you're telling and the story that we already hold in our records. So oral histories are a great one. So along the lines of your project, if you interview people, it would be great to then perhaps collect that primary source, that first-hand account, rather than just use that as fodder for your outcome and just collect the outcome. Let's have the oral history as well, so we've got like the full story as it's recounted by the person for whom it's a lived experience. Does that answer the question a little bit?
Gavin, that just reminds me of something I forgot to say. This is like stating the absolute obvious, but it really is important that you show us in your application that you are familiar with the sorts of things available at the State Library and the John Oxley collection about Queensland history, about your topic specifically, but also show an awareness that you want to contribute to the collection as well. It can be the outcome of your project, or, as Robyn said, something that you find along the way. Yeah. But very important that you do remember that you must give an example of how you're going to use the collection in your work.
Can I just add that we can, as we do the assessments, we can pick the applications where people haven't done that at 100 paces.
Yep.
A quick Trove search won't do it for you.
No, it won't, I'm afraid, because the applications are of a high standard. It's never easy to choose them. And just on the side of the business ones, just because the business you might be interested in and the town you're interested in might not be BHP or Mount Isa Mines, it might just be a little soft drink manufacturer. That is still a business, and the history of those small businesses that don't attract worldwide attention and aren't written up in every second newspaper are immensely important in Queensland history. So don't define business, if you want to apply for the business fellowship, narrowly. Be broad, because, well, a pastoral station's a business, for instance. So don't only think of it as something registered on the stock exchange that you hear about in the news. Be creative. If you want to apply for the business fellowship, be creative in how you present your idea as a business. A travelling photographer, for instance, ran a business. So we're interested in those kinds of businesses. It's a little bit like we're all aware that it's easy to find records of the great events, the openings and closings of parliaments and that sort of thing, but the smaller events of everyday life that are the real fabric of a society are often the things that aren't written up in newspapers with banner headlines, yet they're extremely important in understanding the texture of how a society develops.
One more point to make too. You might find, as you're scouring the State Library's catalogue and looking at our resources, that we really genuinely don't have much or anything about the topic you're interested in proposing. And that's also great because through your application you can demonstrate that and articulate that, so that for sure, look at resources which swirl around it, and you can make that statement as part of your application. I have found nothing. There is nothing in this collection, so we'll be particularly delighted if you're really going down a path we haven't investigated at all in acquiring things for the collection.
So that means that finding a gap is a good thing, rather?
Sure.
Absolutely. Finding a gap is really important, and there are an awful lot of them.
Okay. I might just, because, you know, I'm not sure how familiar everybody is with requesting out material and using material at State Library, so that might be a little bit new for people. Did you want to talk a little bit about coming to terms with that process, Matthew and Louise? Like, you know, a lot of people come into the reading room in the John Oxley and like, well, where's all the, this can't be all the books because there's only a section of material that is out, and we have a repository, a couple of repositories across the other side of the building, which our access services staff retrieve material from. You can go into our catalogue online, you request it, and yes, we have a lot of digitised material, but we also have a lot of physical material that's not been turned into digital form yet. So, you know, did you want to talk a little bit about sort of navigating and actual the nuts and bolts of doing research?
Well, I think we had a really great induction at the beginning from Chrissy, who's up the back there, where all of this was explained. And I actually thought that I knew the State Library pretty well because I've been in and out of the art collections for a long time, but there is actually so much. And when you go into the I don't know, what do they call the stacks at the back? You see how much there is. So it was really great to be taken through the requesting area and have an area where it gets placed for you, so you can request it before you leave home, and you can have it sitting there for you to look at by the end of the day, and it won't disappear again at 5 o'clock. It might be there for a few days until you put it back on the trolley. So that was really amazing. And there was also an induction to the State Archives where I hadn't actually been. Matthew was much more familiar over there, but also as a researcher, it's just this whole other kind of uncharted territory that you can go into and find so much material.
Yeah, it's a great privilege to have the access as a fellow to the research space on level 4, and to feel at home and not like using the main research room is great. It's a wonderful space, but it is a privileged space out the back where you can have materials sitting waiting for you to come back to them. And you also get, you probably don't get privileged access to the librarians, but you do feel maybe more comfortable asking librarians things, and they're probably the main resource at the library. It's not the printed stuff as much as the librarians who know how to advise you to oblique ways to research something, ways to search for something that isn't obvious. So that's one of the things I treasured in my time here, was the access to the librarians, feeling like I wasn't being a bother, that they were welcoming my constant nagging requests for stuff. And I also really enjoyed getting a lot of the stuff out and finding, because it was such an indulgent period of research, I would request an item, like it might be something about civil defence organisation or a public health pamphlet or something that the government printer had printed, and it would come out in a box. And while I'm looking through the box, I would be seeing all this other stuff that I hadn't known about, but it was just very interesting. And sometimes it was directly useful, but it was a happenstance, it was serendipity, it was just luck. But that comes from being here so often for
All
long
these rabbit
periods.
holes you could go down.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Keen to work to time, so I think we might move to asking some questions. So what I might just do is get people to raise their hand. We'll just do this in a slightly awkward way, where if you raise your hand, and then I'll just restate the question for the recording. Is there anything that people had burning top of their mind that they wanted to ask? Yeah. It feels like an auction, but no. Yeah.
So I've completed a Master's of Arts in Research and Exegesis. My question is, because dance is my communication writing body book. In the application, what am I asking? Can we put in, yes, we use the word space, but that's not my first language. English is my third language. Okay? So if I put in something that gives you a demonstration of the kind of research I want to do, which is dance elders in Queensland, how we tell our identity stories in place through our bodies, as artists, cultural artists.
I'll have a quick go at explaining that. So, this is somebody who's looking at investigating dance, and that some of the outcomes of that project would be like movement of the body, and you know, how would you undertake? Because everything preferences like a written, the documented, and I suppose it's a bit of a question of the intangible heritage. How would you work with that? I'll quickly answer that in one part, where a lot of people think that the fellowship is to get a stipend to do the thing, but it's really about supporting the research which enables a thing to happen.
Yep.
So that's probably one first point. But did you want to talk a little bit about, thoughts of? I suppose that's a benefit in a way where it's like however you want to. Like we've had visual artists respond to World War I diaries. We've had people do the research and then take their own path in many different ways. So is there any response to that question?
I think provided you explain, just do exactly what you said you would do about how later the research would be embodied, provided you explain that, I see no reason why you can't apply for a fellowship along those lines. Now, the other thing that just occurred to me, and this is Robyn's area, not mine, but this whole issue of permission, would you need to get permission from any other cultural artist when you were doing this? Because if you, yes, I was going to say, just make sure you just give half a sentence to show you're aware of that, because permission is really important. It's not just about images, it's also about oral history. I was telling Matthew before about a colleague of mine in another state who had a difficult experience of doing an oral history about 5 years ago, most of the interviews, and she meticulously, fortunately, collected all the permissions and kept them, because later on, very sadly, one of the interviewees developed dementia, and when the publication came out, had people read it to him, and he said, I could never have said that. Fortunately, she still had the recording and she still had the permission. So those things really are terribly sad for that man, because he obviously regretted having said it, which is grim, really. But again, you do have to think about protecting yourself a little bit as well, not just in that kind of situation, but in others. So just in your dance project, just make sure you show the assessors that you are aware that permission would be important.
Just quickly on that as well, I would just, if anyone's from an academic background, we don't have that that ethics committee or clearance. Our threshold for that isn't anywhere near as formal.
No.
What we really just require is documentation that person is given. A contributor has appropriately licensed and given permission, so it doesn't have as an official. Like I know, people's like ethics clearance is like a very large deal. We don't have that overlay. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'll just go. She just beat you to the punch. Sorry. Yeah.
I just wondered if you could just give a very brief overview of the 3 different types of grants.
Sure. So I can give an overview of and all this information's on the website. So we've got a range of fellowships which have different amounts attached. So there's the fellowship. So there's the John Oxley Library Fellowship. It's $20,000. It's Queensland, area Queensland history. We have the Queensland Business Leaders Hall of Fame Fellowship. It's $15,000, and these are all 12 months. And that's business history within Queensland, and so Helen's talked a little bit about that. We have the Middlehauser Scholar in Residence, so it's a $15,000 stipend, and it's to do research which would be of benefit to the Queensland gallery, libraries, archives and museums sector. So if you go back and if you Seth Ellis has recently completed his project where he's looking at the presence of sound in the archive and how historically cultural institutions haven't paid a great deal of attention to sound, but there's this kind of tension where sound is actually supremely evocative of memory. And if you actually did have a way to make sound more prominent through library catalogues, exhibition or whatever, that maybe his kind of, thesis is that, we'd be able to open up those kinds of stories and also be able to connect with people on a deeper level by making the I want to say visibility of sound. It's kind of stupid, but you know what I mean. To make that more prominent and to be able to interrogate, and that's what people. That's what's lovely about the fellowships is people want to interrogate the collection from ways we never think of. Like somebody might say, as an artist, I want to see all the collection items that are red, or I want to filter out black and white photographs or sepia photographs from my results search because I want a particular aesthetic. So, yeah. Yeah, so I'm getting off on tangents, sorry. So then there's those fellowship opportunities. Then we do sometimes offer an honorary John Oxley Library Fellowship, which doesn't have any budget attached to it. We offer on a biennial, it's not being offered this year, it's being offered next year, the Letty Katz Award, which is for Queensland Music History Inquiry. So, previous like John Wilsteed, Peter Rowenfeld have been previous, awardees of that. Then we also have you can nominate an individual for the John Oxley Library Award, and that's a recognition award of somebody who's, been outstanding contribution to Queensland history. And then we have the John Oxley Library Community History Award, which the Herberton Museum won that last year for their efforts to champion history in that particular area. And there is a $5,000 award attached to that. So if you know anybody working in that community heritage space, that's a good way for them, one, to be recognised, but also it comes with $5,000 support to continue the good work they're doing.
So is that just a person? Is that just
A nominee could be a person or a group.
Okay.
Yep. And then the last one is it's $15,000. So, and this will be the second year it's being run. It's the Monica Clare Research Fellowship. So Dr. Fiona Foley was the inaugural fellow for that. That's an identified fellowship, so you have to be of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander background to apply. That's acknowledging we had previously, the John Oxley, we say it's about Queensland history, it's, but it's like John Oxley Library himself sailed up the Brisbane River and dispossessed like Aboriginal people of their land. Would you feel like applying for a fellowship for the, and, so we haven't had a First Nations researcher do the John Oxley Library Fellowship yet, which would be great to get that to happen. But the Monica Clare Research Fellowship provides an opportunity for. It's really a commitment that we have this ongoing commitment to First Nations people telling their own stories. Rather, there are a lot of history of white historians telling stories of First Nations people, but really empowering people to tell their own stories. So that's $15,000, 12-month. Yeah. Where?
Would you mind telling us a little bit about the judging panel? And also, has anyone previously applied to do a creative writing project?
There's been, so people will often say, I want to write a book, I want to write a poem, I want to write a musical album. So the creative writing in that response to that's quite, that's very much encouraged. And a lot of people, they might want to write historical account, they might want to write, a published historical local history. They might want to write, historical fiction. That's again, we've had quite a lot of fellows. Judith, I forget her last name, Powell, wrote and published a series of books based, like set in Brisbane in Second World War, and I think
Victoria
it
Carlos.
trilogy, and she's published one or two of
Yes.
them. So Judith Powell's her name.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely it's possible. And then, sorry, I keep going tangent. And the other question was the judging panel. So typically, I sit on all the panels. So that time in April is a busy time for me. But then we also have, generally there are about another 3 or 4 people. So they come from a background of where they might be historians, collection experts, you know, the Monica Clare Fellowship, for example. Like, we have, you know, people who are deeply grounded in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities, and they are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people themselves. So it's generally a panel of about 4 people, and then we get all the applications, review them, and it's a process not dissimilar to, you know, a job panel, you know, where, you know, people, you know, there's a shortlisting process, people look at the applications, it's a written application, and then it doesn't happen for every category, but there may be instances where if we can't split 2 applicants and we want to, like, get that deeper information, we may do an interview with those people to say, look, because it is apples and oranges sometimes. If somebody wants to, like, do research in order to do a sculptural work of the pearling industry in the Torres Strait, and somebody wants to do, you know, write a historical account of, you know, the representation of frogs in Queensland, like, you know, how do you judge those? And we have those set criteria, so we judge by the criteria, and that enables us to look at those key things of, you know, link to Queensland history, link to the collection, you know, is this a sustainable project, you know, those kind of things. No, so, yeah, sorry. Yeah, there you go. Everyone will get their question answered, I promise.
Without appearing to be mercenary, can you give us a bit of an explanation in relation to the money and how is it allocated by way of tranches, and if you've got to meet certain hurdles in order to?
Yeah, sure. So it's a question about I suppose the milestone payments for the bursary. So we split it over. It's over 3 sections. So you get an initial payment upfront, and then when you meet the milestones. So once you've done your requisite blog posts, and then so there's a mid sort of, you know, instalment, and then once you deliver you don't have to publish the book to get paid. I'd be absolutely, lots of people have, like, you know, done the research, but, you know, it's about completing the research, not publishing the book. So, you know, then the 12 months might have, you know, elapsed, and then you would, once you've done, you know, things like the presentation for research reveals and met those commitments, then there's that final payment to pay out the 100% of the schedule. So yeah, as any of the successful fellows, we have an agreement, a funding, which basically spells out the milestones. Sorry.
I'm just interested to know whether there's any kind of appetite or interest in, say, a digital outcome that develops an interface with the collection in order to kind of couple historical material with contemporary material and geolocate that. That's kind of part 1 of the question. The second part of that is that even technically feasible within how the catalogue currently works? And the third part is coming in with a super techie kind of solution going to put the entire panel off?
Yeah, it's a good question. I should, from the outset, I should say that we also run a digital catalyst program. So that it's not included as part of the suite of the Queensland Memory Awards, but it will be announced pretty shortly. It'll be open. So Keir Winesmith was the inaugural catalyst in residence, and that is specifically digital humanities, very techie, kind of, you know, open, utilising open data, those sorts of things. Having said that, there's no, we very much encourage people to use technology, but I think it's in order to bring about new knowledge, not just to be, you know, the technical, you know, it's like, oh, that's a really elegant solution to that problem, but does it tell you anything new? So I think that would be a like what problem is it trying to solve would be a key question. And then also if it's utilising our collection, which is sometimes dependent on it being in a digital form. So if you're looking to have an interface with, to interface with, there's an API for Primo, our discovery layer for our catalogue. So there is some things you can do in terms of that interoperability, but it is also you might suggest a technical solution or something that is, that may interact and may improve things, but whether the organisation does or doesn't take it up, that you won't have any control necessarily over that.
I guess to clarify, I'm not kind of talking about, a new user interface catalogue or anything like that. I'm talking about, so I'm interested in ghost signs and their role in thinking about the urban landscape in a contemporary and historical sense, and being able to identify visual material in the collection that shows signs in location at different points in time. So you can map a history of a sign on a building over time based on historical material and encourage user-generated contributions to kind of keep telling that story.
Yeah, I definitely. That's absolutely in scope, and I would just encourage to think about the sustainability. It's like the platform. Using open source. Using something where it's like, and I know Ruti and me. He did. He's a Queensland Business Leader Hall of Fame fellow. Who did history of Chinese business in Queensland, and he just used just an open source platform to do a timeline and just to demonstrate that historical point. So utilising available tools, doing that sort of thing. It sounds like using that technology to tell a story. Yeah, it's very applicable.
So the final bit is it's not going to freak everybody out on the panel.
Well, if the ghost is meant to, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, if I talk about APIs and things, people aren't going to go, what the hell are you talking about?
I think we do have diversity of experience.
Yeah.
So, some people will know the card catalogue back to front of the collection, and then other people will know, about the latest open data. Yeah.
And just so long as you explain what you'd like to do in the words you used just then, I can't see any reason why not. It's a little bit similar to the slightly unusual idea of embodiment, for instance. So just so long as you explain it in that sort of clear way, there's no reason why you couldn't use that as a topic, I wouldn't have thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, President.
Are there things in the collection that don't come up when you do a catalogue search?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
So the question is, are there
yeah.
things that don't come up in the catalogue when you do a search?
Yeah, because often, I'll think, I wonder if the State Library's got that, I'll do that, and most of the time, nothing comes up. Yet there's a few things that I know are in the or have been deposited, or is that the right word?
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't come up yet, so I'm just sort of wondering if there's a way that if you were a fellow, that how would you access, or would there be a way of sort of getting access to those materials?
Well, I think that's where a bit of librarian help comes in, but not just help with bleeding our brains for what we know, but also our help with maybe helping you with search strategy. You're only going to find things if you use sort of different and varied ways of trying to circle around the topic and to try and land in on it. And sometimes you have to narrow a search or broaden a search, and the words you use are really critical. And it's best to go for sort of blanket coverage if you're not quite finding what you want. So try all sorts of different ways of searching, but we can really help you there. I'll give you an example of some things in our collection which are just not catalogued to the extent to which we'd love them to be. And so we have a vast ephemera collection, and by ephemera I mean tickets, flyers, pamphlets, little under 10 pages sort of booklets, bits and pieces, little bits of documentary evidence. There's no way we have the resources to catalogue each and every one individually. So what we have devised is a sort of subject heading system for our ephemera collection, and and we file things according to those subjects. So we'll have a box for the Queensland Opera Company, Opera Queensland or something. We'll have a box for a political party, a box for cricket Queensland or something, or all sorts of different topics and little bits of ephemera that we find. We put it in the box, so the box has a catalogue record saying ephemera collection Opera Queensland, but each individual thing doesn't. So
Is that a paper one, like a manual one, not a digital? Like it's not just a tag, a digital tag that you can find?
So if you search the catalogue under Opera Queensland, you might come across a record that's called sort of ephemera collection. So in that collection is a box full of stuff which is not individually catalogued at all. So you've got to get the box out and look in it to find out. And there's lots of parts of the collection which are like that, and there are lots of things which are briefly described or perhaps not even described, depending on what it is and where it is.
And that's this. You can ask for, if there's any questions about. I know this is in the collection. You can ask those questions as well. Is it? Yep. Tell them that.
Just a quick one on the honorary fellowship, how that works.
Sure. So the honorary fellowship, what we get people to do when they're applying for the, particularly for the John Oxley, is we get people to nominate whether they would be willing to undertake it in an honorary capacity. So we only give out one John Oxley Library Fellowship. So there's sometimes when we think this is really good research, would be a good project to happen, but you get all the benefits of the access to the space, access to the staff. You get the support that you need to do the project, but there's no money attached, so you wouldn't get the $20,000 for the John Oxley. I think we've done 2 honorary fellowships the last 2 years. So, but what we want to avoid is the awkward situation. People nominate up front whether they would or wouldn't be willing to do that, because obviously, some people are like, no, I need. If it doesn't come with money, I can't do it. But then we're not in the position of asking, would you or wouldn't you? It's in the application form specified. Yep. Yeah.
So in regards to the money, is it for outcomes or is it for the work that you do, like to pay the sort of small wage?
It's for the work. It's not for outcomes. So it's not like, you need to deliver a performance, to do that. So it's more about looking at, recompensing your time in order to do that research.
So in the application, would you need to say, I'd be doing this for have this many hours?
No.
No.
Yeah, the amount that you get is set. So, okay. I mean, you could spend. I mean, we would probably prefer if you didn't kill yourself trying. That it's achievable within a set amount of hours to do that.
And
Yeah.
a follow-up.
Yeah.
With the set criteria that it's judged on,
Yeah.
are these published?
Yes, through the
They're on
through
the
the guidelines on the website.
Okay,
Yep.
thank
Yep.
you.
I'm getting the slow wind up from Chrissy. So, is there any other questions people had? Yeah.
I imagine that some projects might be able to be submitted for a couple of different categories. What do you do with that? Like for the businesses, for example, I don't know whether the business and the John Oxley could be either way.
Yep. So the question is, can you apply for one application for multiple categories? Yes, you can. And we've had instances where an applicant has even submitted it for one category, and we're like, you sure? It might be a stronger candidate in this pool. So definitely it can. Just be mindful of there are specific criteria, or, requirements for those different ones. So think about which category yours is the best fit for. But it can definitely, there is a lot of bleed between the categories as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so how historical does it need to be? Like, if it's something that's still happening contemporarily and may only be the last 20 years, say?
Yeah, so the question's about how historical does it need to be. I suppose, just very, sorry, I don't want to take too long, but at State Library, it's Queensland, something that we've been very active in is championing contemporary history. You know, we don't have the dome and the sort of back history of the Mitchell Library at State Library New South Wales or State Library Victoria. You know, Queensland is Queensland, comparatively, you know, young state. So we really embrace that contemporary history, and, you know, Robyn's team have done a lot of work in the last 12 months to collect the COVID experience of Queensland, commissioning photographers to go around the state, recording people's perspectives, because, you know, if you don't do it now, sometimes it'll be lost forever. So, you know, something that happened 1 year ago is no more or less valid than something that happened 200 years ago. I think it's asking that question of how greatly does this contribute to an understanding of Queensland, which the hard thing is sometimes we don't know. You know, it's easier to say 150 years ago, this did actually have an impact, and you've got to maybe work a bit harder if it's a fairly recent event. But.
Can I ask a quick question? Are there any teachers in the group tonight? Ah, good. Because one of the... but you may still have influence. One of the things that tends to be rather missing from Queensland history is children's words of how they've experienced events. Now, it struck me, children were very much affected by the COVID experience. There was, you know, the child that cried all night because granddad might die because he's over 80 or whatever granddad was. We do seem to have a bit of a lack of that. A few years ago, when I was researching Brisbane floods for an exhibition here, it was extremely difficult. I only found one contemporary child's account of living through one of the severe floods. Now, if you think about it, children's experiences are actually very important because they actually tell you quite a bit about society as it is developing and the sorts of impressions made upon them. So if you have an opportunity to encourage children to write about their experiences during COVID or other major events, it's a really important thing to do, and I think would be important for the library, Robyn, wouldn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
If you've got young kids and you talking, I always tell this joke of, like, when we bring in new collection development policies, we should do a video of somebody explaining to their child why one particular work is being, like, thrown in the bin and why one has somehow been kept for posterity. But then we did run a series of workshops for parents called Straight from the Fridge, which was about, you know, how you make selection decisions about your children's artwork. So it was quite well subscribed. I'd like to, that probably is time for tonight. I'd like to thank you so much for coming and your participation and your interest in doing research at State Library of Queensland. I didn't say it from the outset, but this is actually the very first physical event that's been held at State Library since COVID. So everyone, thank you. If you do have more questions or you want to get more information, the first protocol is the Queensland Memory Awards page, and where it gives you all the category information, the guidelines, and also where to go for more information. I'd like to thank our panel, Robyn, Louise, Helen and Matthew, and thank them. And I'd just like to thank my colleagues, Chrissy Theodosio, who is really she is the master of the Queensland Memory Awards and makes this all possible. So I want to thank her, Troy, Keith and Olivia Robinson for making it possible as well. So thank you so much. Good luck with your applications, and please reach out if you need assistance. Thank you.